Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 2nd of February 2020. I'd like to say that I hope everyone's getting through this amazing time we're living through. It's almost like a science fiction movie and has all the aspects of these horror movies, of course, with pandemics and conspiracies behind. There's always conspiracy in the movies, or you wouldn't watch them. Because you got to get bad guys, you see. And often the bad guys in the movies have real-life counterparts. Stories generally, in fact, fictional stories to do with terror, that kind of thing. And plagues always, they're based on some facts, of course, naturally. And we do live in dangerous times. We've lived in dangerous times for an awful long time, with the rise of academia and incredible funding into research and development in all countries to do mainly with warfare purposes, including the biowarfare area. Most of the inventions we have, and even across the board in electronics and everything, all really came out of, including your microwave oven, came out of the weapons development industry. We don't realize that. And it's the same thing too with a lot of the benefits that come out of medicine and so on. So yeah, in the movies you definitely do have a lot of facts, of course, with biowarfare and the threats of biowarfare. And years ago I remember mentioning some of or giving talks on some of the histories of biowarfare, stuff that was really from declassified government archives. So you can't just jump on and say, it's conspiracy theory, unless the governments are they're actually giving us the conspiracy theories. But one good book was put out by a journalist in Toronto, who I think he worked with the Toronto Star, I think, at the time. But he put a book out, a good one book out of many books across the world being put out on this very subject. But his one was Canada's contribution to biowarfare, because Canada during World War II and afterwards for a long time had led the field in biowarfare research. And so he wrote a book called Deadly Allies, and it was Canada's secret war. And in it, of course, he talks about World War II and how money was thrown out like crazy, like it always is in panic situations. And governments are always broken until it comes to warfare purposes, if you notice that, and suddenly they've got all this money to throw around. And Deadly Allies goes into the stories, declassified again, factual, recorded stories, no conspiracy theory, of big companies in Canada where the money was thrown at to develop bioweapons for long-term protracted warfare, meaning the war against Germany or whoever it happened to be could last for a generation or even two. This is how they look at things way down the road. And I don't think it sounds corny, because leading up to World War II and during it, the Army Cadet Forces, even in Canada and across Britain and Australia and New Zealand, they had the Army Cadet Force with the idea of recruiting them straight from the cadet forces once they turned 17 into the army and then off to war. So that you'd have a seamless supply, basically, of recruits, you see. But in the biowarfare industry, they had big laboratories. Some of them were awfully well known, even years later, to do with blood scandals and tainted blood and so on. Some of the guys who worked in these laboratories talked about how callous that they were when they were holding vials or picking up stuff at railway stations and so on. And I know people who did the same in Britain, by the way, not too long ago. They were callous. They would toss these packages up in the air, and there could be enough plague in it to wipe out a good-sized city. This is how callous that they were. And it's a good book to read, Deadly Allies. It's well worth it, because you find that many of the things that were developed during World War II and afterwards, including all the rust diseases for crops to destroy enemies' crops and things, and their animal food supply, where that a form of disease, which really, you could pretty well put it down to the same thing as mad cow disease, the effects it had. And then they developed stuff transmissible by ticks, They could infect the ticks, drop them in deers from the air, and watch the disease the ticks were contaminated with affect the deer that they were dropped on. And I think we're still suffering from some of that today. So it's not, you can't blame the public for being afraid about what governments are up to, especially, and here's the thing too, I was thinking about this, going over all this documentation recently coming out from China and elsewhere about this pandemic, which is now a global pandemic, they're saying, with a lot of mystery behind it too, with the usual kind of occurrences leading up to it that lead to conspiracy theories naturally, and then the governments clamp down on anybody who mentions them. Because you see, you don't realize you're now living in a system, it's a technocratic system really, where scientists and those from academia will decide what's right, wrong, and all the peasantry has to be quiet and obey and listen and do what you're told. And but this whole idea of public servants is out the window. There's no servants for the public. There's really commissars in this day and age, and they treat you and like aged school teachers would teach in Britain way back years ago, as a little peon, a little nobody coming into the classroom. It's much the same attitude. It's a really an aloof type of real class distinction. See, they're the upper class now. They're the scientific elites, and you're the bottom. You're the nobodies who could never understand anything. You see, so they don't tell you anything. That's it. You wouldn't understand. It's too complex for you to understand. You know. And I'm not really exaggerating that unfortunately is the attitude, but all the different programs to contain the public's chit-chat on social media, and there's big programs out there that have all sprung into action across the board for folk who don't know about it. Massive departments were set up in advance years ago to take care of this kind of thing in any kind of crisis situation, including plague outbreaks and things like that, and how to contain the public and how to ridicule, and even censor lots of people too, who go off the beaten track, because you're not really allowed to think for yourself here. You know, you're allowed to watch as many terrifying movies as you want, like fictional movies, but don't ever voice an opinion unless you're qualified to do it with a whole string of letters after your name. It's rather repugnant, really. That's not the way to treat the public, and the public, believe it or not, can understand an awful lot more than these characters in the ivory towers would ever believe. And here is something it ties into, because you understand, we really are living in a system of so-called specialists who dictate to us all on different levels, and we're supposed to obey. This is the new system. This really is it, folks. Like the Club of Rome said, democracy wouldn't work, and they couldn't get the big jobs done with experts in charge unless you really abolish this idea of democracy. Well, how do you abolish it? The public wouldn't like that. So you just introduce it under different terms. You know, control over this, control over that, specialists for this, experts, like Bertrand Russell said. Will train the public that they can't make a move without expert opinion, and that's what they've done, you see, in a lot of areas. But the Club of Rome said, yeah, democracy is too slow and cumbersome. You can't get big things done that they wanted to at the top. Not the people who know how everything should be run and where the future should go, and they'll direct it. They just know how to do it all. They're in charge, really. That's what it is, through countless associations and amalgamations of different sciences and disciplines, as they call it. And we're supposed to just obey. And unfortunately, here's the thing, to getting back to deadly allies and so on, there are laboratories. Every country's got them, regardless of all their international treaties on biowarfare and what they can do and what they can test and what they can't test and so on. And of course, I've said it years ago, that the big laboratories that deal with even vaccines also deal with creating new types of viruses and bacterium. and rust, as they call it, for crops and all that. They deal with all these things. So really, technically, they're all part of the same system. It depends what it's used for at a particular time, according to the designation or of the title you'd give them. But that's what it's all about, folks. You can't have people being kept in the dark about things which can affect their lives. Of course you can't. And it's wrong for any governments to try and pretend that they've got control over everybody. That's what happened in totalitarian countries before. And if your government squashes information on the public and treats them like real, not just children, but stupid children, then you end up with big problems, because no one's going to be honest, even to each other at the top either, by the way. That's what you get in totalitarian systems. And that's what happened when the whole world suffered when the Chernobyl reactors went up. The whole world suffered, still suffering, by the way, because you had a totalitarian system, a chain of command of government employees, all government employees, the state in charge, and no one will think outside the box. You don't complain in totalitarian regimes. You don't become a whistleblower. That's what was found out with the big world investigations into it afterwards. In such regimes, a whistleblower doesn't exist. They're not allowed to exist, because you have to have individuality in a system and a culture. It must be present to get a whistleblower. In totalitarian regimes, you just don't get them, and they're not tolerated at all. So when things are starting to go wrong, like Chernobyl, anyone who says, well, you've got to do this or do that or whatever, or shut this down. No, the test must go ahead, you see. And that's how it goes. Or you suffer. As it happened, because everything was denied as it was happening, the whole world has suffered. And that's what you get in totalitarian regimes. Now, that's a lesson for the West as well, all of the West. Because if they start treating their people, their public, the same way as a totalitarian regime will treat them, you're going to have trouble, awful trouble. And you create more mistrust than ever before. Now, it's one thing to calm a child that's petrified of getting his jabs from a doctor. You know, that's one thing. But you can't calm the general public down by giving them fairy stories or even threatening them, especially threatening them when they ask pertinent questions. And they want honest answers. Not this, oh, you wouldn't understand. Little peasants, you. Well, if it's all your lives at stake, I think that you've got a right to hear, and then you'll decide whether you understand it or not. You know? We do live in a world, as I say, where people are terrified of scientists now, with biowarfare, etc. Of course they're terrified. All the reports in the past, all the money that went into digging up corpses in the permafrost in Canada and elsewhere, from the Spanish flu, so they could bring the viruses back into circulation, just in case they ever came. Well, the same one would never come back unless it was introduced again. But people are not as stupid as you think. And punishing folk, the general population, is not a democratic system. Personally, and I know it's not democratic anyway, but personally, I'd rather declare that it is a totalitarian regime and a scientifically organized system of control, rather than treat us all like little children. Personally, that's me. And yet, yeah, I agree too, there's a lot of people out there that will make hay, as the sun shines, as they say, when there's terror going on, to sell all kinds of stuff. I understand that too. Because that's also the system in which we live, is this awful system of money. Money can generally buy silence or buy people off, basically. That's part of the problem in all of societies across the planet right now. It's corrupt. The whole system is corrupt. We know it's corrupt. And each time something comes out about the corruption in politics and politicians, and how politicians in a few years, regardless of their salary, can be multimillionaires at times. So something's wrong, isn't it? We're not that stupid either. So who do they really serve? The one who's putting all those millions into their pockets? Or the public? I mean, it's a very corrupt system we're living in today. And this whole idea of a deep state is very evident because democracy is a show for the public, basically, really. And there's definitely a deep state, as they call it, behind it all to make sure it keeps on going regardless of whoever they put into politics as a little front person at the bottom. In other words, no one is really sitting back expecting some character to get into politics that they don't want there at the top. It doesn't happen that way. I've noticed too over many, many years that the politicians, many of them that come and go, and not too famous, some of them, some well-known, some not, end up in these quiet, very quiet and high-level international jobs with the new technocracy, running big important things across the world, deciding things for us outside of the realm of politics. And they draft up big agendas on different levels in different areas and have the government rubber stamp them. It's quite interesting to watch it. And it's outside of the newspapers generally. Or if it's mentioned at all, you're given some kind of vague organization you've never heard of before. Very important organizations. Very important. You find the same people that staff the World Health Organizations at the top. Often they're CEOs of it, in fact, are far left socialists who don't know anything about medicine at all, in fact. They're just appointed there. All the other ones, underlings, are beneath them. They're attached to it. There's nothing in this world, in our system, that isn't politicized. And when I say politicized, I mean really managed by a deep state. There's nothing. Nothing is left to chance, really. So when you see all this hype going on about this coronavirus that they haven't quite given a name, they're starting to give a name from its origin on it, but coronaviruses are quite common. It just depends on the virility of a particular strain, that's all. They're watching it now to see if it has a sudden leap forward, as you say, in mutation. That's what they're watching it for. And I don't deny that anything is impossible when it comes to it. I do not deny either, because no one is going to tell you. No one is going to tell you the truth here on where it really came from, this particular virus. You'll never get to know if it was in a lab before it escaped or whatever. You won't really get any. No one's going to take the blame for this. And the findings down the road, maybe in a few years' time, will still be probably well classified if they find, and they can find quite easily the different markers on these things, because they're altered. If you go into laboratories, they're often altered. They can tell, for instance, vaccines, for instance, what kind of virus and attenuated viruses and so on are in them. They've got markers. You can tell which lab created them, in fact, any batch of vaccines. But it's very similar with when they've been working on particular strains of viruses for whatever purposes. They'll know where it came from, but will never tell the public the truth. I don't know. I don't know. And there's already, as you all know, I'm sure everybody who's been following this has jumped into the same routes that you'll fall down of where it originated from. We're in a system really akin to, not as bad, I might say right now anyway, to Chernobyl, with the political structure, with the scientists in charge, all working for the same system, all given amazing authority by governments, right down to what they're going to tell the public or not tell the public, and whistleblowers will not be tolerated. Now, silence on things like this, and there's books about this too, by the way, put out again by those who want to stay in control, mentioning the fact that conspiracy always comes because of the necessity of government secrecy. So conspiracy theories abound because of government secrecy. Well, perhaps there shouldn't be so much government secrecy when it affects the people. Governments better start to remember who they're supposedly serving. or come out and tell us quite openly or honestly that they're not serving us at all. They're dominating us. We should, wouldn't you like clarification and some honesty, eh? Wouldn't you like that? But right now, I've noticed that even doing searches for information on what's been happening across the world with this pandemic, it's hard to get good information. A lot of the information is out there is 2 weeks old. You'll see your searches being slowed like crazy because of, again, the emergency organizations that have kicked in to guard the internet. It's interesting to watch it. And at the bottom, you'll see all the different institutions it's running through on the bottom of your search, you know. Yeah, of course you're being watched. Yes, you're being noted. If anyone who's looking into this, they're trying to find out immediately your location, who you are and your location. Of course, they'll try to find out why you're looking at this too. You're being studied. We're all being studied amazingly well. We have been before this all happened too, but now it's very evident as the new organizations that you haven't heard of going to kick into gear, actually. You know, quite fascinating to watch. But they're not going to allow any lay people to give them any advice out there too. And sure, you're going to have all kinds of misinformation, disinformation, and so on. And not all put out by the ones at the bottom, by the way, because you're not going to get much of the truth out to the public at all right now. That's the first thing. It's like the movies always tell you the same thing, eh? And disaster movies as well. The first thing, the governments get together and they decide not to tell the public. Oh, they'll panic, you know. Right to the end, they don't tell them. It's quite funny to think about in some ways how predictable the systems are when it comes to those in power, you know. Always the same. Always the same. I remember years ago, back in the 90s, I gave talks on NATO. And NATO's pact that they had, which used to be, supposedly, I could never find one, except somebody got one for me once, that was an old one, but it was supposed to be by law in Britain, available at every post office for anybody who found out about it and then asked for it, but they wouldn't just give it to you unless you asked for it. And it was about the response for warfare purposes, or for radiation, meaning the bombs or whatever. That's what at that time, that's what they thought about. Or else plague. And really, the lockdown procedures by NATO, all NATO countries that signed on to it, and they still stand today, were to really lock down whole towns and cities that were infected. And anyone who tried to move out those cities, just like the movies. I mean, the movies had a lot of basis in fact. They looked into what the plans were and so on, and they put them into their fictional movies. But yeah, they would shoot anybody on sight if they moved out. Now, I'm not terrifying anybody here. As far as we know right now, we're dealing with a form of a flu-like symptom. Virus. But don't forget who's putting out the hype here. The people in China were panicking because after the SARS outbreak in about 2003, it came out in their newspapers at the time, and you don't know who to believe, naturally. But they thought it was a kind of ethno-specific type virus designed to hit them. And they had that in their newspapers. And that would surface once in a... There could have been propaganda on their side. Who knows? Since then, they've been terrified of such a thing happening. And that's why they're really terrified now. They know that in Wuhan, where the thing broke out initially, supposedly, so we're told, we don't even know that for sure, that they have a biowarfare at level 4 lab there. And the West calls it biowarfare, but all these level 4 labs are basically dealing with that kind of stuff. So I guess they're all used for both purposes, or certainly can be used for both purposes. Of course they are. But it was interesting too, they say that 5 million people got out of there before they locked it down. They knew it was coming, you see. But yeah, they're petrified, naturally, absolutely petrified. And I don't blame them. And in countries that won't give you many facts, as I say, just like Chernobyl with the old Soviet Union, panic increases too. And you're left really, I mean, people in Chernobyl and around that area obeyed their governments. Even when the towns that had been built around there were full of people, they didn't evacuate them right away. Always contain the problem by not telling the public, even though it's detrimental to them. So it's not really fair at all.